Sterling Logistics is losing millions, Marcus. Right now. Imani Hayes, a warehouse inventory clerk, stated quietly amidst the morning's clamor. Marcus Thorne, the grizzled foreman, just sighed, dismissing it as another pipe dream from a mind too sharp for its station. In the cramped, dusty inventory office, Imani's fingers danced across her keyboard, cross-referencing ancient digital entries with the physical stock sheet spread meticulously across her desk. Every box, every pallet, every bolt, she knew its journey. A faint, yet persistent discrepancy nagged at her, a phantom limb in the company's vast supply chain, specifically within the high-volume electronics components. On her personal spreadsheet, a vibrant, alarming pattern began to emerge, too consistent to be random, too costly to ignore. Long after her shift ended, the glow of Imani's laptop illuminated her small apartment, a beacon against the city's quiet hum. She delved deeper into the company's anonymized data, a digital archaeologist sifting through layers of transactions. Hours blurred as she built a complex model, pinpointing the exact juncture in the supply chain where the wasteful loophole occurred. The final calculation flashed on her screen, a staggering 9-figure sum bleeding from Sterling Logistics year after year. The next morning, in the break room, Imani tried to explain her findings to Marcus. He listened, stirring his coffee, a weary wisdom etched into his face. Imani, I've seen good ideas come and go. The Sterling way is like concrete. It don't move easy. He recounted tales of clerks whose brilliant suggestions were ignored or worse, stolen by those higher up. Don't go challenging the Sterling wall head-on, kid, he warned. It'll just break you. A week later, the glow of Imani Hayes' laptop was the only light in her small apartment. On the screen, a report took shape. Concise, data-rich, a weapon forged in late nights. It meticulously detailed the loophole's mechanics, its insidious financial impact. Each visual graph an irrefutable figure, a silent accusation. Imani had crafted it to be undeniable, a professional testament to a truth the company refused to see. This wasn't just a report. It was her bid to challenge a titan. Miles away, in a penthouse office that seemed to float above Manhattan, Arthur Sterling III, impeccably suited, reviewed quarterly reports with a detached air. His family's logistics empire, Sterling Logistics, was a legacy, not a daily concern. He waved a dismissive hand at a minor budget discrepancy. Legacy systems, he murmured. Trusted suppliers. No need for alarm. His voice, smooth and assured, exuded inherited authority, a world away from the granular details that built his fortune. Imani stood in the gleaming, impersonal corporate reception area, her uniform a stark contrast to the polished chrome and glass. In her hand, the neatly bound report felt heavy, brimming with millions of dollars of truth. She attempted to schedule a meeting with any high-level executive. The receptionist, with a practiced, polite smile, shook her head. I'm sorry, Miss Hayes. Mr. Sterling doesn't take unsolicited meetings from warehouse staff. Imani, frustrated but undeterred, turned to leave. Back in the warehouse break room, Imani recounted her futile attempt to Marcus. He sighed, stirring his coffee. The Sterling wall, Imani. Been there for generations. His voice, etched with years of experience, was heavy with resignation. They don't listen to us down here. Not unless you find a way around it. He offered a subtle, knowing glance. You've got to be smarter than the wall itself. Imani Hayes knew this was her only chance. Arthur Sterling III, the CEO, a man whose very presence radiated inherited power, was momentarily alone, striding from his office toward the elevator. Mr. Sterling, Imani said, her voice clear but not loud enough to startle him. He paused, a flicker of mild annoyance crossing his impeccably composed face. Imani, seizing the fleeting moment, stepped forward, a neat, slim folder in her hand. I've identified a significant loophole in our supply chain costing Sterling Logistics millions annually. This summary outlines my findings. Arthur took the document, his gaze barely brushing her face, his eyes conveying an indifference that cut deeper than any insult. He nodded once, a non-committal gesture, and continued on his way, the heavy folder, now a trivial weight in his hand. Imani watched him go, a hopeful breath catching in her throat, then deflating. Had he even registered her words? Moments later, back in his opulent office, Arthur Sterling III glanced at the folder. A small, derisive smirk played on his lips. Warehouse fantasies. He muttered to his off-screen assistant, Eleanor, a short, dismissive laugh echoing through the expansive room. Apparently, our inventory clerks now fancy themselves strategy consultants. He didn't even open the report, the glossy cover with its simple title, Efficiency Gap Analysis, deemed unworthy of his attention. With a casual flick of his wrist, Arthur tossed the document onto a towering pile of unsolicited proposals and vendor brochures. The corporate graveyard of good intentions and unheard voices. The thick paper landed with a soft thud, instantly forgotten. Just another piece of paper from the company's invisible ranks. The news, or rather the palpable lack of reaction from the executive suite, quickly filtered back to the warehouse. Imani, though visibly hurt by the CEO's casual dismissal, felt a familiar resolve harden within her. She returned to her cramped, dusty inventory office, a quiet fury replacing her initial frustration. This wasn't just about a loophole anymore. It was about respect, about being seen. She pulled a fresh, crisp notebook from her worn backpack. On the first page, in her precise, elegant handwriting, she wrote, Phase 2, Unignorable Truths. Her eyes, tired from long nights of data analysis, now burned with a quiet, unwavering determination. She wouldn't just speak truth to power. She would make power listen. The harsh, fluorescent glow of the public library computer lab was a stark contrast to the opulent office Imani had been turned away from. Yet it was here, amidst the quiet hum of machines and turning pages, that her true power began to manifest. Evenings found Imani Hayes hunched over a borrowed laptop, devouring free online courses in advanced data analytics, her mind a sponge for complex algorithms and statistical modeling. She didn't just understand the data, she felt its pulse, its rhythm, its lies. With each new skill mastered, she layered her observations into a complex predictive model, a digital tapestry that didn't just show the loophole's current drain, but projected its catastrophic long-term impact on Sterling logistics. What started as a simple oversight now screamed of something more insidious, her model suggesting patterns of systemic, almost deliberate, neglect. Imani was no longer just counting inventory. She was unraveling a conspiracy. Weeks later, on the chilly warehouse loading dock, the roar of forklifts provided a percussive backdrop to Imani's quiet revelation. She held out her tablet to Marcus, a new, more comprehensive data model glowing on the screen. Marcus Thorne, a man who had seen decades of corporate bluster and empty promises, peered over her shoulder. His eyes, initially clouded with weariness, widened with each scroll. The intricate web of data, the undeniable accuracy of her projections, the clarity of her logic, it was breathtaking. Imani, he muttered, his voice rough with a newfound awe. This ain't just smart, it's irrefutable. His skepticism, hardened by years of disillusionment, finally cracked, replaced by a fierce, protective pride. He began to offer quiet, strategic advice, born of his own long history within Sterling's labyrinthine politics. Imani had found her first true ally, a grounded anchor in the storm she was about to unleash. Late one night, in the quiet solitude of her small apartment, Imani's relentless analysis yielded its most shocking truth. Her predictive model, combined with meticulous cross-referencing of old company ledgers she'd accessed at the library, pinpointed the wasteful loophole to a single, long-standing supplier contract. It wasn't just inefficient. It was meticulously crafted to be highly disadvantageous to Sterling Logistics, funneling millions into the coffers of a vendor named Evergreen Supply Co. But the true revelation lay deeper. Evergreen Supply wasn't just a vendor. It was a ghost from Sterling's past. Old records, faded and brittle, showed deep historical ties between Evergreen's founding family and the Sterling family itself, going back generations. This wasn't mere negligence. It was potential cronyism, a sacred cow bleeding the company dry, protected by a legacy that had forgotten its own true purpose. The problem had moved beyond simple waste. It was now a matter of integrity, and it reached directly into the Sterling family tree. Imani Hayes knew the direct route was a dead end. Corporate walls were built not just of glass and steel, but of ingrained prejudice and dismissive protocols. Her previous attempts had proven that. So she chose a path less traveled, a digital whisper in the vast, echoing halls of Sterling Logistics. Late one evening, from the quiet anonymity of her small apartment, Imani logged into the company's internal innovation portal, a digital suggestion box usually reserved for trivial complaints or easily ignored efficiency hacks. But Imani's submission was anything but trivial. She uploaded a meticulously crafted report, concise yet devastatingly detailed, outlining the supplier loophole, its precise financial bleed, and the historical context she had painstakingly uncovered. It was designed to be irrefutable, a data-driven missile aimed at the very heart of Sterling's complacency, too compelling for even the most entrenched executive to casually dismiss. The outcome was uncertain, but for Imani, this was her strategic move, a silent declaration of war against waste and willful ignorance. Weeks later, in the impeccably organized office of Arthur Sterling III's assistant, Eleanor Chen, the digital innovation portal glowed. Eleanor, a woman with a reputation for sharp discernment and an uncanny ability to sift corporate wheat from chaff, scrolled through the usual deluge of submissions. Most were predictable, some laughable, none truly innovative. Then, she paused. An anonymous report titled Supply Chain Optimization, Historical Analysis and Future Projections had caught her eye. Its executive summary was startlingly clear, its data points precise, its conclusions alarming. Eleanor, a professional accustomed to the polished presentations of highly paid consultants, found herself genuinely impressed by the depth and accuracy of the anonymous submission. Arthur, her boss, typically dismissed such unsolicited internal reports with a wave of his hand, preferring to rely on his inner circle. But this was different. Against her usual protocol, Eleanor flagged it, a faint flicker of intrigue overriding her ingrained caution. This report, she felt, demanded Arthur's attention. Arthur Sterling III, accustomed to reading reports that confirmed his established views, scanned the anonymous document Eleanor had placed on his desk. His initial reaction was a dismissive scoff, a familiar response to any challenge from below. "Another warehouse fantasy," he muttered, echoing the sentiment he'd once directed at Imani. But as he continued to read, a subtle shift occurred. The figures, presented with stark clarity, were too precise. The historical details about the long-standing supplier contract, specifically the Crownbrook Logistics account, began to niggle at the edges of his memory, jogging vague, almost forgotten childhood recollections of his grandfather, Arthur Sterling II, and hushed conversations about loyalty. He tried to wave it off as over-analysis or the ramblings of an overly zealous employee, but the uncomfortable feeling persisted. A frown deepened on his face as he tapped his fingers impatiently on the glossy paper. The report, despite its anonymous origin, had genuinely unsettled him. Back on the warehouse floor, amidst the rhythmic clang of forklifts and the hum of machinery, Imani Hayes moved with her usual quiet efficiency. But her senses were heightened, tuned to the subtle tremors in the corporate atmosphere. She observed the daily operations related to Crownbrook Logistics, the supplier she had flagged. There were subtle shifts. Managers seemed to be scrutinizing incoming shipments more closely. Inventory checks were unexpectedly tightened. Imani overheard hushed conversations near the break room, murmurs about unexpected audits and executive interest in old contracts. The whispers confirmed it. Her anonymous report had not been ignored. It had caused a ripple, a tremor that was slowly, inexorably, making its way through the upper echelons of Sterling Logistics. A quiet satisfaction settled over Imani. Her message had been received, and Arthur Sterling III, whether he knew it or not, was now dancing to her tune. The crisp ring of the intercom jolted Imani. "Miss Hayes, Mr. Sterling requests your presence in his office immediately." Her heart gave a small, nervous flutter, but her expression remained serene. This was it. Arthur Sterling III, still convinced the anonymous report was a clerical fluke, intended to unmask the clerk behind such audacious claims. He would try to dissect her, expose her lack of credentials, and dismiss her with a condescending smile. Imani smoothed her simple uniform, adjusted the worn public school backpack slung over her shoulder, and walked towards the executive floor. The plush carpet of the penthouse office swallowed her footsteps, a stark contrast to the echoing concrete of her warehouse. Arthur Sterling III sat behind his vast mahogany desk, a predator observing its prey, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. Imani stood before him, small against the opulent backdrop, her eyes steady, unblinking. "So, Ms. Hayes," Arthur began, his voice dripping with thinly veiled amusement. "You believe you found a multi-million-dollar loophole in my company's operations?" He leaned back, expecting a stammering retreat. Instead, Imani calmly unzipped her backpack, pulling out a small tablet. With a few taps, a real-time data visualization bloomed across the large monitor embedded in Arthur's desk. Complex graphs, vibrant and clear, illustrated the flow of goods, highlighting a precise, recurring anomaly. "Sir," Imani stated, her voice quiet but unwavering, "the discrepancy occurs here, in the Q3-Q4 overlap for specialty components. The system registers a 17% over-order rate consistently for the past 3 fiscal years, resulting in a documented loss of $3.2 million annually." She cited specific dates, transaction IDs, and vendor codes with a precision that made Arthur's dismissive smile falter, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. He leaned forward, squinting at the screen, searching for a flaw. Arthur's initial scorn evaporated, replaced by a growing annoyance. "Impossible," he muttered. "Our procurement protocols are ironclad. You must be misinterpreting the data, perhaps a seasonal fluctuation?" Imani met his gaze. "Sir, I've cross-referenced against 5 years of historical data, accounting for seasonal shifts, market demands, and supplier lead times. The overorder is consistent, irrespective of those variables." He tried another angle. "And your sources? Are these official company records? Or personal conjectures?" Imani produced a neatly organized flash drive. "All data extracted directly from Sterling Logistics. Internal databases, sir. I can provide the query logs and raw data files, verified against our physical inventory counts, which I've personally overseen for the past 4 years." Arthur drummed his fingers on the desk, his eyes darting between Imani's calm face and the irrefutable data. He realized with a jolt that her analysis was flawless, a level of detail and foresight his own highly paid executives often lacked. Arthur leaned back again, but this time his posture lacked its former arrogance. A calculating look had replaced his dismissive smirk. He couldn't easily refute her, but he wouldn't concede outright. "All right, Ms. Hayes," he said, a grudging respect subtly entering his tone. "Your observations are certainly detailed." He paused, then continued. "I have a notoriously difficult supply chain segment, the Arctic line components. It's been a persistent drain. I'm assigning you a special project. Optimize it. Prove your theories aren't just academic." He intended it as a complex test, a way to benefit from her talent without fully acknowledging her profound challenge to his authority. Imani accepted the project brief with a subtle, knowing nod. She understood the veiled challenge. This wasn't just about fixing a problem. It was about demonstrating her worth on his terms before she could truly impose hers. Weeks later, in the cramped warehouse inventory office, Imani Hayes and Marcus Thorne huddled over digital models projected onto a dusty whiteboard. Imani, her sleeves rolled up, pointed to a complex flowchart on her tablet. "We can reroute the northeastern stock through the central hub for redistribution, Marcus. It cuts transit time by 18% and reduces dead mileage by 1/3. Marcus, a seasoned veteran, peered at the intricate paths. He'd seen countless efficiency reports that never left a desk, but Imani's work was different. Her solution wasn't just theoretical. It was built from the ground up, using his decades of ground-level insights, transforming a notoriously difficult segment of the supply chain. "Practical ingenuity," he muttered, a rare smile creasing his weathered face. "You've got a mind for this, Imani. Not just numbers, but how things actually move." Imani nodded, a quiet fire in her eyes. The blueprint for Project Maverick was complete, ready to be unveiled. The Sterling Logistics boardroom, a cathedral of polished mahogany and hushed whispers, felt impossibly vast as Imani Hayes stood at its head. Arthur Sterling III watched from his seat, outwardly composed, but a flicker of curiosity played in his eyes. Imani, a small figure against the formidable panel of executives, began to present Project Maverick. Her voice, though calm, Cut through the skepticism. Our analysis indicates a 15% immediate cost reduction potential in the northeastern corridor alone, with projected long-term savings exceeding $20 million annually. A board member, Mr. Harrison, scoffed. "And what are your credentials, young lady, beyond moving boxes?" Imani met his gaze, unflinching. "My credentials are the data, sir, and the data doesn't lie," Arthur observed, his neutrality a thin veil over a growing internal conflict. He had assigned this as a test, but the precision in Imani's voice, the undeniable figures, were beginning to chip away at his entrenched dismissiveness. The following week saw a seismic shift ripple through Sterling Logistics. Project Maverick wasn't just a proposal, it was a revolution. Reports flooded Arthur Sterling III's office, glowing, irrefutable metrics. Efficiency soared, costs plummeted. The northeastern corridor, once a drain, now hummed with optimized precision. Board members, initially skeptical, now offered satisfied nods in meetings. They couldn't deny the impressive results. Arthur received the reports daily, the success undeniable. He publicly attributed the turnaround to new strategic initiatives and, quote, executive foresight. But privately, staring at the graphs showing upward trends, his eyes inevitably lingered on the name subtly embedded in the project's data headers. Imani Hayes. A grudging admiration began to form, a realization that this was no fluke. Late that evening, alone in his opulent office, Arthur Sterling III reviewed the Project Maverick success metrics again. The numbers were staggering, indisputable, yet a knot formed in his stomach. He couldn't dismiss Imani's contribution, not anymore. His long-held beliefs about talent, merit, and the value of lower-level employees were crumbling. He had dismissed her, laughed at her initial report, and assigned this test, expecting failure. Instead, she had delivered a triumph that shamed his own executives. Arthur walked to the panoramic window, staring out at the glittering Manhattan skyline. A seed of doubt, cold and persistent, about his own leadership and the company's legacy, practices began to grow. What other truths had he, in his arrogance, overlooked? Imani's quiet challenge had become a deafening question. Imani Hayes, fueled by lukewarm coffee and an unwavering resolve, sat hunched over her laptop in the quiet hum of her apartment. Her previous success with Project Maverick had only deepened her conviction that more lay hidden beneath Sterling Logistics' surface. As she delved deeper into the intricate web of supplier contracts, cross-referencing decades of invoices with market rates and internal audit trails, a chilling pattern began to emerge. The loophole wasn't merely an oversight. It was a deliberate, meticulously maintained channel, designed to siphon millions from Sterling Logistics into the coffers of a single, long-time vendor. Clauses, barely perceptible to the untrained eye, inflated costs and reduced oversight, suggesting not negligence, but a calculated, systemic exploitation. This wasn't just waste. It was a breach of integrity that ran deeper than any spreadsheet could initially reveal. The company wasn't just losing money. It was being bled dry by a hidden hand. The revelation sent Imani to the dusty quiet of the public library archives, where she spent evenings sifting through microfiche and yellowed newspaper clippings. Her fingers traced the faded print of old company records, and a name began to appear with alarming frequency. Sterling Logistics, partnered with Evergreen Supply Company since 1952. Evergreen Supply Company, the very vendor at the heart of the current, wasteful contract. Imani found articles detailing the close friendship between Arthur Sterling II, the founder's son and former CEO, and Evergreen's original proprietor. It was a sacred cow, a generational alliance shrouded in sentimentality that had allowed the loophole to fester, unchecked, for over 70 years. This wasn't just a corporate problem. It was Arthur Sterling III's legacy, a personal betrayal woven into the very fabric of his family's empire. The stakes had just become immeasurably higher. Back in her apartment, the air crackled with a silent, formidable energy. Imani meticulously compiled her findings. The elegant data models proving the multi-million-dollar drain, the historical documents detailing the unethical favoritism, the financial projections showing the catastrophic long-term impact. Each piece of evidence was tabbed, cross-referenced, and ready. Marcus Thorne, who had quietly stopped by with dinner, saw the thick binder on her table. His eyes, usually weary, widened with a mixture of awe and genuine concern. "Imani," he whispered, his voice heavy. This could shake the whole company to its foundations. Are you sure you're safe?" Imani looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "I've never been more prepared, Marcus," she replied, her voice calm, laden with the quiet confidence of someone holding all the cards. The calm before the storm. But Imani was the storm. Imani Hayes no longer waited for chance encounters in hallways. The triumphs of Project Maverick had given her an undeniable leverage, a quiet authority that resonated even in the executive suites. She formally requested a meeting with Arthur Sterling III, citing, quote, urgent findings related to Project Maverick's long-term impact. Arthur, a man who rarely granted unscheduled audiences to anyone below VP level, found himself intrigued. Imani's audacity, coupled with the undeniable success she'd delivered, pricked at his curiosity. He granted the meeting, a grudging acceptance of a power shift he hadn't yet fully acknowledged. Imani entered his opulent office, not with the hesitant steps of a warehouse clerk, but with the steady stride of someone who knew her worth. In her hands she held a thick, meticulously organized dossier, a stark contrast to the casual reports Arthur was accustomed to. She radiated a quiet authority, her gaze unwavering as she met Arthur's curious, almost annoyed, stare. The stage was set. The protagonist, now empowered, had demanded a meeting with the antagonist, promising a major reveal. "Mr. Sterling," Imani began, her voice calm, clear, and utterly devoid of fear, "I believe you'll find this audit illuminating." She laid the comprehensive dossier on his polished mahogany desk, its weight thudding softly, a sound that seemed to echo the gravity of its contents. Imani systematically walked him through each section. She detailed the full financial impact of the wasteful loophole, not just millions, but hundreds of millions lost over decades. She exposed the unethical supplier contract, deliberately structured to inflate costs and reduce oversight, a parasitic relationship feeding off Sterling logistics. Then, she unveiled the generations-long negligence, how this sacred cow had been protected by familial ties, a dirty secret buried deep in the Sterling legacy. Arthur's face, initially a mask of skepticism, drained of color as Imani laid out the irrefutable evidence. Close-ups on damning documents, old ledgers, inflated invoices, contract clauses highlighted in stark red, flashed across his vision. His hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as he leafed through pages, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrifying realization. The sheer scale and personal implications of her findings hit him like a physical blow. The protagonist had unveiled the full, devastating truth, leaving the antagonist speechless. This is an outrage," Arthur finally erupted, his voice echoing through the vast office, raw with fury. "Insubordination, slander, you fabricated this, all of it. Who do you think you are, a warehouse clerk accusing me of this?" He slammed his fist on the desk, his face red, contorted with rage. "You're fired! Get out of my office, Imani Hayes. You're finished at Sterling Logistics." He paced wildly, his accusations a desperate attempt to discredit her, to protect the gilded legacy he had inherited. Imani remained perfectly still, her posture erect, her gaze unwavering. She allowed his fury to burn itself out, knowing his outburst was the predictable thrashing of a cornered man. Her evidence was unshakable, meticulously gathered, and impervious to his bluster. She offered no defense, no counter-argument, simply allowing his self-incrimination to fill the silence. The antagonist had exploded in a fit of rage, but the protagonist remained calm. Once Arthur's outburst subsided, leaving him breathless and agitated, Imani spoke again, her voice cutting through the tense silence like a surgeon's scalpel. "Mr. Sterling, this isn't just about identifying problems." She pushed another crisp, professionally bound document across the desk. "This is about the solution. My Sterling Revival Plan." Arthur stared at the new document, bewildered. Imani continued, detailing a merit-based supply chain overhaul, a transparent vendor selection process designed to eliminate cronyism, and, most importantly, an internal, talent catalyst development program. This program, she explained, would actively seek out and empower overlooked employees, providing them with training and opportunities to innovate from within. Her proposal wasn't merely about fixing the loophole. It was about fundamentally transforming Sterling logistics culture from top to bottom. It was a visionary blueprint for a company built on genuine merit, not inherited privilege. The protagonist had presented a revolutionary solution, not just a problem, stunning the antagonist. Arthur finally managed a derisive laugh, a short, sharp sound that echoed Hassan Mansuri's initial contempt. "A Sterling revival plan?" he scoffed, leaning back in his $15,000 chair, attempting to regain his composure. "From a warehouse clerk? What audacity! You think you, with no executive experience, no business school, can overhaul $1 billion company? This is a fantasy, Imani. A pipe dream, utterly unfeasible." He dismissed her, his tone laced with condescension, questioning her authority, her experience, and the very possibility of such a radical change. Imani let him speak, her patient, unwavering gaze fixed on him, allowing his arrogance to further expose the depth of his prejudice. She watched him, her hand subtly, almost imperceptibly, reaching into her worn public school backpack, a small, knowing glint in her eyes. The antagonist mocked the protagonist's bold vision, completely unaware of what was coming next. Imani Hayes, her expression unwavering, reached into her worn public school backpack. From its depths, she produced a small, unassuming digital recorder. Arthur Sterling III watched, a flicker of irritation crossing his face, his mind still reeling from the audacity of her Sterling revival plan. He was about to dismiss it as another juvenile stunt when Imani's thumb pressed a button. Suddenly, Arthur's opulent office was filled with his own unmistakable voice, captured with startling clarity. "These warehouse types, they're stuck in the past," the recorded voice sneered. "Can't innovate their way out of a paper bag. Why bother trying to teach them new tricks when our legacy systems have always worked? It's why we just let things run their course, easier than dealing with all that resistance from the ground up." Arthur's face, moments ago flushed with anger, drained of all color. He stared at the small device, then at Imani, his jaw slack. The recording was undeniable. It wasn't just a dismissive comment, it was a clear articulation of the very prejudice and systemic negligence that had allowed the multi-million-dollar loophole to fester for years, linking his own words directly to the company's resistance to change. "What is this?" Arthur stammered, his voice hoarse, a predator suddenly finding itself trapped. Where did you get this? You can't record private conversations. That's illegal." He lunged forward as if to snatch the device, but Imani calmly raised a hand, stopping him in his tracks. His panic was palpable, the fear of legal and reputational ruin washing over him. "New York is a unilateral consent state, Mr. Sterling," Imani replied, her voice steady as a rock against his rising hysteria. "Completely legal. And this recording documents systemic discrimination against an entire class of employees, and a deliberate negligence that has cost your company millions. I'm quite certain the Labor Department, the SEC, and a few enterprising journalists would find this very compelling evidence." Arthur clutched his head, pacing a frantic circle in front of his desk. The world he had so carefully constructed was crumbling around him, exposed by the quiet strength of a warehouse clerk. "What do you want?" Arthur whispered, his bluster completely gone. Imani smiled, but it held no warmth, only the quiet satisfaction of a strategist whose plan had unfolded perfectly. She wasn't here for revenge. She was here for justice. "I want you to choose, Mr. Sterling," Imani said, retrieving a crisply bound document from her backpack. "You can continue to believe that people like me and Marcus are merely warehouse types, incapable of innovation, and this recording will end up on the desk of every journalist and labor lawyer in New York by sundown." She paused, letting the threat hang heavy in the air. "Or you can prove that you truly learned something today. I want the immediate, full implementation of the Sterling revival plan I just outlined. I want Marcus Thorne promoted to senior operations supervisor with an executive-level salary, and I want to be appointed director of strategic operations." Her demands were precise, professional, and utterly non-negotiable. Arthur stared at the contract, his face etched with defeat, and the dawning realization that his empire was now in the hands of the very person he had so carelessly dismissed. Arthur Sterling III looked from Imani to the detailed proposals of her Sterling revival plan, then back to her unwavering gaze. Her demands were audacious, yet undeniably sound. His fury had evaporated, replaced by a deep, unsettling introspection. Fragmented stories of his grandfather, Arthur Sterling II, a self-made immigrant who had arrived in this country with nothing but a fierce will and a brilliant mind, began to surface in his memory. His grandfather had built Sterling Logistics from scratch, valuing innovation and merit above all else, often saying, "A good idea can come from anywhere, even the lowest rung." Imani's plan, so meticulously researched and ethically sound, ironically aligned perfectly with his family's forgotten original values, the very principles Arthur had allowed to be corrupted by generations of inherited wealth and casual prejudice. He had strayed so far from the true Sterling legacy. He looked out at the glittering Manhattan skyline, a kingdom built on his ancestors' merit, now nearly lost by his own hubris. Imani watched patiently, knowing this was Arthur's moment of reckoning. Arthur Sterling III, his face a landscape of defeat and dawning comprehension, picked up the solid gold pen that had signed countless contracts of inherited legacy. A heavy sigh, the sound of a dynasty bending, escaped him. His hand, once firm in its dismissals, now trembled slightly as he scrawled his signature across the document Imani had presented. He looked at her, his eyes holding a complex mixture of resentment, grudging respect, and a nascent, uncomfortable understanding. Imani Hayes, the warehouse clerk, simply accepted the signed contract, her composure unwavering. A faint, almost imperceptible hint of triumph played at the corners of her mouth, a quiet acknowledgement of the battle won. The ink was dry, the terms accepted. A new chapter for Sterling Logistics, one written by an unseen hand, had just begun. Just as Arthur began to lean back, a flicker of relief crossing his features, Imani made her final, calculated move. From her worn backpack, she produced a second, identical digital recorder, placing it casually on the gleaming desk. "For your information, Mr. Sterling," Imani said, her voice calm and clear. "Everything that happened here today was also recorded, including you signing this contract of your own free will." Arthur stared, his eyes widening in a mixture of disbelief and a dawning, almost fearful admiration. Then, a sound he hadn't made in years escaped him, a genuine, mirthless laugh. It wasn't the cruel, dismissive laugh of old, but the sound of a man utterly outmaneuvered, recognizing a brilliance that transcended his own. The next morning, the warehouse floor buzzed with an unfamiliar energy. Marcus Thorne, the grizzled foreman who had seen too many good ideas die, stood before a beaming HR representative. He was informed of his promotion to senior operations supervisor, complete with a significant pay raise and new responsibilities. Marcus's eyes welled, overwhelmed by the sudden, validating shift in his life. "Imani," he choked out, finding her observing from a distance. "Thank you, I don't know what to say." Imani offered him a soft, knowing smile. "It's just the beginning, Marcus," she replied, her voice carrying the quiet conviction of a visionary. "Just the beginning for Sterling Logistics." The respect in their eyes, a mutual acknowledgement of shared struggle and triumph, spoke volumes. 6 months later, Sterling Logistics was a different company. The vast warehouse, once a labyrinth of inefficiency, now hummed with synchronized purpose. Forklifts moved with precision, guided by optimized routes, and digital dashboards glowed with green metrics, signaling record profits and unprecedented efficiency. Employee morale, once a quiet groan, now echoed with genuine enthusiasm. Imani Hayes' Sterling revival plan wasn't just a policy, it was an industry success story, lauded in business journals. Arthur Sterling III, impeccable as ever but with a new lightness in his step, walked the bustling, newly optimized floor alongside Imani, now Director of Strategic Operations, and Marcus Thorne, the newly appointed Senior Operations Supervisor. A quiet sense of shared accomplishment, a triumph built on data and defiance, settled over them. The company, once a monument to inherited stagnation, now throbbed with vibrant, energetic life. At the company's quarterly town hall, the transformation was palpable. Arthur Sterling III stood at the podium, a large screen behind him displaying the Sterling revival plan in all its impactful glory. Addressing a packed room of employees, he spoke not with his old, dismissive arrogance, but with a profound humility. He publicly credited Imani for the company's extraordinary turnaround, his voice steady as he admitted his past prejudices and short-sightedness. "I learned, sometimes the hard way, that true leadership isn't about inherited titles, but about listening to every voice, especially those you've overlooked." Imani watched from the front row, a proud but reserved smile gracing her lips, as her vision, once ridiculed, was validated by the very man who had dismissed her. The applause that followed was not merely polite, it was enthusiastic, a testament to a leader reborn. In her new, sleek executive office, high above the revitalized city, Imani Hayes embodied the promise of the Talent Catalyst program she had championed. A large window overlooked the sprawling metropolis, a stark contrast to her old, cramped warehouse desk. Beside her sat Maya, a bright young intern from a disadvantaged background, eyes wide with eagerness as Imani patiently guided her through complex data analysis. "The numbers don't lie, Maya," Imani said softly, her voice carrying the wisdom of her own journey. "But it's your interpretation, your unique perspective that gives them power." Maya nodded, absorbing every word, looking up at Imani not just as a mentor, but as a living symbol of what was possible when talent met opportunity and courage. A Forbes reporter, keen to capture the story of Sterling Logistics' remarkable resurgence, sat across from Imani and Arthur in a bright, modern conference room. "Ms. Hayes," the journalist began, "what's the core lesson here?" Imani met the reporter's gaze, her eyes clear and resolute. "Your origins don't determine your destiny," she stated. "Only your effort does. And always, always have evidence to back up your claims." Arthur, now a picture of enlightened leadership, added, "And the smartest investment you can make is in human potential, regardless of where it comes from." He looked at Imani, a shared understanding passing between them, a silent acknowledgement of the arduous journey from ridicule to redemption. Their story proved that real intelligence knows no color, social class, or age.